Oh, hello. Hello everyone. My name's Paul. I'm going to talk a bit more about me in a bit, but we'll start off by saying, can you guess where that image is? It's obviously a ChatGPT image, isn't it? I asked ChatGPT to make me an image of my talk, and that's what it gave me. But I work in TV, so I'm going to put it in a frame like that, and we're going to talk a bit about TV. Who watches TV? Yeah, most people do. It's fine. I might need you to do some sound effects here because this normally makes I don't know. Maybe you're not old enough. Is anyone old enough to remember what sound this makes? 100 years ago, what happened? Does anyone know what happened 100 years ago? This happened, and what was this? This character, this rather sinister character, was a dog called Stooky Bill. And Stooky Bill was the first thing to appear on a television anywhere ever in the world. And that's because this guy, a guy called John Logie Baird, and by the way, that's his grandson there, which I'll talk about again in a minute. But John Logie Baird, 100 years ago, so the 2nd of October in 1925, he conducted a successful experiment over in Soho, in Frith Street, and he successfully made an image of a human. So initially it was Stooky Bill, and then it was the office boy from downstairs who came and sat in front of his camera, which was frankly a Heath Robinson kind of jury rig. And it was the first television. So I was very privileged to go to this event. A month and a half ago, almost a couple of months ago now, which was on the 100th anniversary to the day of this experiment. And John Logie Baird was an incredible inventor. Does anyone know what John Logie Baird invented before the television? Anyone got any idea? Any guesses? Before television, Baird invented a sock, right? You're supposed to laugh at that bit. Yeah. Baird invented a sock. So what was the point of Baird? Well, he was a crazy inventor. He came up with stuff. He worked at a power station. He knocked out the power over all of Glasgow because he worked at a power station, was experimenting with huge voltages in his job, which he shouldn't have been doing. He had ill health. He was generally a crazy guy. But he invented the television. The television, not necessarily the television as we know it, but he was the first person to make a moving image go from one place to another in real time. And the thing was, in 1925, no one really knew what to do with this thing. Because people had talked about television, it had been a feature of science fiction, and the word had been coined, and there was radio, right? And so people thought, television, that'd be like radio with pictures. But when it happened, everyone just kind of went, well, we can imagine all of the wild and crazy things we could do with this, but we're not really sure. There's no business model. And so it took 1953, it took, 27 years before there was actually mass adoption of this technology, and this is the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II in 1953, which is generally recognised as the first mass participation television event in the UK certainly, but probably the world as well. So the UK was ahead of the US and everyone else with television simply because Baird had invented it here. And apparently there was a lot of vested interests in the US over the radio. So the US and in other locations, radio was still quite a new thing when Baird invented television. They would say, well, we're just getting people used to radio. We don't want to start doing pictures too. That's a bit crazy. The coronation happened in 1953. That was the one where everybody suddenly, not everybody, but television started to become commonplace. People had coronation parties and people crowded around these tiny little TV sets. So that was a wild and crazy time. So let's get rid of that and talk about. So TV 100 years ago arrived with loads of ideas, but without a clear business model, without skills, without regulation, and with a whole lot of societal angst. Does that sound familiar to everyone? Yeah? And so this is why we talk about that 100 years ago. And we've been talking about AI in society for my lifetime, which is probably longer than I'd like to admit. And so it's not a new idea, but what we can do with it today is a new thing that's scaring people. So who am I? My name is Paul Markham. I run a business called Markham Digital Media. I run a meetup called Cloud Native Media. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll prompt you about that later. I do stuff with TV, sometimes radio, mainly TV. And I work in technology to make sure that TV channels can do what they need to do with cloud. Thus the Cloud Native Media. I've been doing that for a few years. But broadcasting organisations tend to be quite old. I mean, most of them are pushing 100 years old, or BBC's a bit more than that, right? And so they tend to be struggling with some of these new technologies. And what are the challenges that broadcasting organisations have? And I think organisations across society have. We still run organisations like 19th century factories. We have a boss. We have people working on things that are predetermined tasks. We have processes where documents have to be written. We have meetings and committees, and we have all kinds of processes that really derive from Taylor and Ford in the early 20th century, but late 19th century. So these ideas of harnessing mechanization in the Industrial Revolution with people as almost dumb automatons doing a job that had been predetermined and that they've been trained in. So if you're working in a 19th century factory, you're going to be trained to do a specific task, and you're just going to do that one thing over and over again, probably for the rest of your life, right? And this is not the world we inhabit, but a lot of the management doctrine and business structures that we live with today are based in that world, right? They're still based in that world, and there's still a lot of baggage that comes from this idea of humans as almost little robots that have to be given instructions, right? And I think we all know in this room that is a world that is rapidly disappearing behind us. And within that change, we've got a lot of people who are quite lost and really quite scared. And they're lost because, they're lost and scared because they don't understand the change that is happening. And I think, actually, that's probably true of all of us. I don't really understand the change that's happening. I don't think any of us really understand the change that's happening. We know it's quite big. We know it's pretty significant. But we don't know what the detail, how's this really going to play out? It's uncharted territory. We don't really know. And I think, again, thinking back to that example of television, think about the first time that somebody put an image on a screen, a moving image on a screen. That was almost as radical, right? It was really a really crazy idea that suddenly became reality. So our leaders, particularly in big organisations, they think they can apply a quick fix. They think they can take their old machine and stick a bit of AI on the front, add some jump leads, say, yeah, well, we're AI powered now. We can fire a few people and then everything will carry on as it was before. And who in the room here thinks that's the way it's going to work out? No one. I think that's the answer, because it's not going to work that way. And we are currently, I think, in a world where we have a lot of senior business people who really believe that's the way it's going to work out. They think, oh, well, we're running our business, we're going to put a bit of AI in, we're going to carry on doing what we did before, and we'll just get rid of people and make more money, right? And I don't know, but I don't think that's the way it's going to work. And I don't think you should either. So I'm going to talk a bit about the innovator's dilemma. Has anybody heard of the innovator's dilemma? No, good. Well, I can talk about it then, because if I get something wrong, you won't be able to catch me out. So the innovator's dilemma it comes from a book that was written in the 90s by Clay Christensen. It's a very good book if you get a chance to read it. I have read this book. I do have a joke sometimes in my talks that I put up books like Team Topologies, and I go, well, you know what? I've heard it's a really good book, but I've never read it. I have actually read this one. But the point with, has anyone heard the term disruptive technology? Yeah. So disruptive technology came from this book. It's this guy's idea. And how does it work? Well, the thing that happens when you have new technology in business is that somebody in your organisation, think about Kodak. Yeah, let's think about Kodak in our minds as an example. It's a good one. Somebody says, well, if we do the new thing, Kodak's digital photography, it's going to take revenue from our existing business. So Kodak, for those that don't know, they made all their money from selling films. And they thought, oh, we could launch a digital camera, but nobody will buy our films anymore. The films that you put in cameras. And so they didn't do it. And then somebody else comes along and says, quite rightly, well, if we don't do that, somebody else is going to do that. Right? It's fair enough, isn't it? If you're Kodak and you don't want to make a digital camera, then eventually somebody else is going to come along and make a digital camera and steal your business anyway. And this is where, these things are logical, but this is where it starts to go a little bit wrong, which is somebody comes along and says, all right, well, let's do the new thing in the same way we currently do our old things. So in Kodak's case, and I don't know if this really happened, I'm just making it up, but in Kodak's case, it could be Kodak said, well, we make our money out of selling films with cameras, so why don't we sell SD cards? Or whatever the equivalent was 30 years ago, which wasn't SD cards, but you get the point. And let's replicate our business model in this new world of technology. And nothing else needs to change. I think that's the underlying context, isn't it? But the thing is, the main benefit of digital cameras is you don't have to buy films. So the main benefit of new technologies is that you don't have to do them in the same way as the old technology. And this is what trips up businesses. The other real example of the innovator's dilemma and disruptive technology is Ryanair and the airline industry, right? So there's Ryanair, there's EasyJet, there's others in other parts of the world. But they came along and took the idea of flying people from A to B and applied a different business model to it. And this is exactly what disruptive innovation is, because they said, well, actually, we can take lots of costs out of it. We've got all of these cost-saving ideas. We can sell tickets more cheaply, and we can sell tickets to people, and this is why this example is important. We can sell tickets to people who would not be otherwise flying at all, right? So it's about opening up a new market. So Ryanair, let's say, comes along in the 90s, and they sell airline tickets. They fly people to new destinations, and these are people that are not saying, oh, I won't fly BA, I'll fly Ryanair because it's cheaper. These are people who are saying, oh, well, I couldn't afford to fly to that destination before, but now I can, right? And that's really interesting, because that's what is called, in business terms, a new market, or it's called growing the market, right? Because you're suddenly selling an existing service or product to new people because you've managed to make it cheaper. And at the same time, your big competitors, your established competitors, like the BAs in the market, are there saying, oh, well, we don't care about those people because our market is the business people and the people who fly first class and the people at the top of the market. That's where we make our money. So let Ryanair have their cheapskates. We'll service the top of the market. And of course, the problem with that is, if you're an established business, is that those businesses that refine their game at the bottom of the market, selling the cheapest possible version of the product, they tend to start moving up the market. Right? They tend to start saying, oh, well, actually, now we can offer seat reservations. Now we can offer extras. Now we can start to tempt people away from those more expensive providers. And the great thing about this book is that Clay Christensen provides examples of this not just happening in the late 20th century or the 21st century. He goes right back to the invention of mechanical excavators in the 1950s. And this pattern plays out again and again and again, which is that innovation comes from disruptive innovation comes from the bottom of the market, and the big players end up they almost fall off the top of the market because they're only serving the most expensive customers with the most money, and eventually those most expensive customers with the most money go, oh, well, actually, we'll buy the cheaper product now, thank you very much. So where are the answers to all this? I don't have all the answers, by the way. I'm sorry. I'm just going to try and help you discover them. You must have heard of Conway's Law. Who's heard of Conway's Law? Somebody must have heard of Conway's Law. So in terms of organisations, Conway's Law, I think, is really important because Conway's Law tells us to structure an organisation to reflect the technology we want to build, right? And when we're talking about building a new software stack or moving to cloud or whatever, that's not easy, but it's you can kind of visualize it. And when we're talking about building AI into our big workflow, how do we apply Conway's Law to that? It's a bit of a head scratch, isn't it? Because ultimately, what is it? What is the structure of the thing we want to build that we need to reflect in our organisation structure? How do we represent that? And look, my take on this is oh yeah, it ain't what we do, it's the way we do it. My take on this is very much, you've got to start thinking, instead of thinking about the technology, you've got to start thinking about, well, what is it that we're actually selling? Or even if you're not selling something, what are you actually doing for humanity here? Right? What's the outcome that really you're going for? Because AI and all of this, the thing about cloud is we've got effectively, I know it's not really infinite, but for us, it's effectively infinite amounts of compute available on tap if you can pay for it. And we've got AI, which is almost infinite amounts of knowledge and creativity even on tap if we want it. So we start asking ourselves, well, how do we structure our organisation, our work, our efforts, so that we can actually meet our end customers' needs? Because there's so much we can do. And again, thinking back to that television example of going back 100 years, when, imagine all the things that we do with television and screens and video today. And in 1925, people thought about all of those wild things, and they didn't know where to start, right? And eventually, the people said, well, okay, well, we can put entertainment on it, we can put drama on it, we can put news on it, and eventually it turned into a thing, and we now have surveillance everywhere. And obviously George Orwell happened, right? George Orwell happened and 1984 happened, and that was partly a reaction to the rise of television, because it was partly Orwell seeing, okay, but actually this is a technology that will be used for surveillance and all of these things. Again, sounds familiar, doesn't it? Right? So what can you do? I know this is a really cheesy image. I'll come up with a better one for the next time I do this talk. So let's talk about skills and knowledge, because I think there's a lot of popular misunderstanding about skills and what skills are. And I like this example that a colleague of mine came up with, which was, you can read the Ladybird book of how to swim and dive, right? You can read it as many times as you like. You can even watch 100 YouTube videos. You can ask ChatGPT. But unless you get in the water, you're never going to be able to swim, right? No matter how much you've read or understood about how swimming works or how diving works, you're never going to be able to do it until you actually try it, right? And that, to me, is the essence of skills. There's other examples. There's like musical instruments. Like you could read forever about how to play the guitar. And if you pick up a guitar, are you going to be able to play it? Probably not, right? Because you need to practice. You need to have that muscle memory, to have that repetitive experience of doing something. So that's what skills are, as opposed to what knowledge is. So we've got knowledge everywhere now. We had Google, and then we had YouTube, and now we've got ChatGPT and Claude. I mean, we've got so much knowledge, we don't know what to do with it. But skills are a bit more nuanced than that. They're not just knowledge. They're the application of knowledge. They're the repetitive understanding of what works and what doesn't, and how to do things. And that's really important. Oh yes, So let's go through the hierarchy. So we've got information at the bottom. You can find information anywhere. Information. We live in an information abundant age. And then you've got techniques, things like little things that you can do, that practice and understand and repeat and do things with information. How to walk, how to play the guitar. Techniques are important. Then you've got processes. Processes might involve multiple people. They might involve multiple things that you do in sequence, techniques that you employ in sequence to do stuff. And then right at the top, you've got intentions, right? And I think the point here really is, at the bottom of this list, information is plentiful and cheap, right? I mean, there's too much of it. You have to sift through it. But actually, what's most important here is going up to the intentions. The intentions are absolutely everything in what we do, and thinking about our intentions. So going back to thinking about, well, how are people going to use this? What are they going to do with it? How do we define that? How do we make sure that everybody who's working on this project actually has that same vision of it? To some people, these things sound obvious, but I think when you dig into it, you realise that actually they're not as obvious. And also, when you start talking to people about it, you realise that not everybody maybe shares the same view or the same opinion of what it means. So my thing here is called the age of why. So I say, like, and this is one of those trite models that consultants talk about, which doesn't really apply in university and is completely imperfect in many ways. So forgive me for that. But in the age of who, which was before the Industrial Revolution, we was a craft age, right? We had people who produced agreed value. We had people who made things. We had people who did things. And it was all about who it was and what they could do. And then we moved into the Industrial Revolution. We had the age of how, which was companies and structures and procedures and automation and factories and things really kind of brought scale into the picture, and they codified repetitive things that could be a how. And then the age of why, which I think we are now in, is actually we've automated the age of how. Because I think that the point here is we started off with automating the who, we automated the craft, and then we automated with the Industrial Revolution and the time that came after it, we automated and perfected the automation of the scale of the how. But actually now AI and cloud and software can do all of that. So we're actually now asking ourselves, well, of all the gazillion things we could do, why are we doing this particular one? Because actually that's the hard choice that we now have to make. We now have to exercise judgment on not what's possible, but what's worth doing, right? And that could be worth doing in different senses. That could be ethically worth doing. It could be commercially worth doing. And it depends on your value system. So it's back to this idea of values and ethics and if your value is, as we keep hearing from the business world at the moment and AI, if your value is to make as much money as possible, then okay, well, I guess that's how you see AI panning out. But I think we're going to go beyond that, because actually this just gives us so much power. So just to summarise this stuff for you, we've seen the pace of change rapidly evolve. I haven't really talked about that, but I think that's a factor. I'm sure you're all aware of how things have got faster. We have to deploy faster. Cybersecurity threats are coming faster. Everything's happening faster. We have to do things differently. We can't just swap one tool for another. I mean, the whole workflow has to change. It's not about technologies. It's not about Conway's law. I mean, Conway's law is showing us the way, but that's not the whole picture. And we need to define our outcomes. And define our outcomes in terms that I think are specific enough that everyone can share the same outcome if they're working on something together. So everybody knows what the goal is, not just in a sort of vague wishy-washy way, but in a sort of very specific, measurable way, so that we understand what they're talking about. I mean, I think acceptance criteria are an example of trying to do that on quite a tight level, but I think if you think about acceptance criteria on a whole organisation level, in terms of, well, what are we actually trying to do here? So, you know, it's all right, I'm nearly at the end, I know you want to go home. So let's go back to John Logie Baird, because he didn't have a blueprint. He didn't know what he was doing. He just thought, oh, well, I like this idea of moving pictures. That sounds like a fun thing to try and make work in my crazy workshop full of crazy stuff. We don't need to predict the future. We shouldn't try, because people who predict the future are invariably wrong, at least partly. Cloud gives us infinite capacity. I know it doesn't really, but I think for all intents and purposes for the stuff that we're working on, cloud gives us as much compute and storage and everything as we could possibly want. So it's effectively infinite. AI gives us infinite information creativity. Well, that's debatable, isn't it? Is AI infinitely creative, or does it just produce? And is infinite creativity a good thing, right? In the world of slop, right? We're just getting a lot of slop out of it. Is it good creativity? Well, probably not always. But the skill is choosing. The skill is making a decision and thinking about the intent and why you're doing things, right? So your internal judgment, right? Your internal judgment and your intent, rather than the technology, is the thing that makes you valuable, because you can actually define, you can shape the technology to do whatever it is that you want to do, right? But deciding what you want to do is the most important part. Oh yeah, and on that note, I have a little video from last night where, just to demonstrate what I mean by deciding to do the right thing. Does anyone speak Spanish in the room? No? Oh. That's a fail. Is an automatic live dub of the participants, including me, into Spanish. Bienvenidos a Cloud Native Media número 21. Pero primero debo presentar a nuestro intérprete de lenguaje de señas británico en vivo. Así que si podemos tener al intérprete. So there we go. We had last night. We did a live online event. We had a live Spanish dubbed stream. I don't speak Spanish, but I just did. You'll notice the lip sync wasn't lip synced, but it was. I've had Spanish speakers today tell me, actually, no, that's pretty good. And it's weirdly, it's in my voice, which is a little bit uncanny, a little bit disconcerting. And then we had sign language translation. Again, it's an AI avatar doing sign language translation in real time, live. Well, this was on a live feed, putting it back into the stream. The AI sign language translation wasn't quite as polished as the Spanish, but it was still really good. And look, the great intent there is to make content accessible in a way that wouldn't be possible with human translators, right? You're not on the scale that we're talking about. With this technology, all of those people who natively sign, they could have access to live sports that they'd never be able to have access to in any other way. We could have people with minority languages in remote parts of the world being able to access English content because it can be live dubbed into their language. And this is why I love this technology, and all of the AI doom and gloom that I hear about all the bad things that people are worried about AI can do. Well, this is a great antidote to that, because actually I think we can do some great stuff with AI. And on that note, I have, has this got stuck? It's got stuck because of the video. Really has got stuck. There we go. Right. So please do find me on LinkedIn. On Sundays I sometimes post these humorous cartoons, and yeah, this was from a few weeks ago when we had this AWS outage, and this was the characterization of LinkedIn for that week. And so you can find me, just that's a URL you can find me, and that's the picture you can find on LinkedIn. But thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you got something out of it, and thank you, Ethan, for having me along.